Welcome to today's webinar, Insurance Considerations for Pharmacists and Professional Liability and Compounding is presented by Kristen Jones and Sarah Shepard with Pharmacists Mutual Insurance. Kristen Jones graduated from the University of Wyoming School of Pharmacy in 2003 with a doctorate of pharmacy. Kristen has practiced in both retail and hospital pharmacy for 17 years. She joined Pharmacists Mutual Companies as a risk management consultant in 2014. She is the co-author of the 2018 Pharmacists Mutual Claims Study, outlining more than 13,000 pharmacy claims over a 25-year span. Sarah Shepard attended Baylor University, earning a BA degree in corporate communications. Sarah joined Pharmacists Mutual as a field representative in 2015, serving members in Central and Southern Texas, and provides specialized insurance solutions. Today's webinar is accredited through ACPE and is worth 1 CE credit hour. CE credit is applied following completion of an evaluation link found on the last slide in the presentation handout. You can find the handout on the lower portion of the GoToWebinar toolbox under Handouts. We are recording this session and will include the recording and evaluation link in a follow-up email. Questions may be submitted throughout the webinar using the GoToWebinar toolbox on the right side of your screen under the Questions tab. We will answer the questions submitted following the presentation. If we do not get to your question today, a list of questions and answers will be emailed to all attendees following the webinar. Thank you for joining today's session.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you to ARL for hosting this talk. This is something Sarah and I are both pretty passionate about, and so we hope that we can provide you with some good information and takeaways after this hour. And feel free to submit questions as we're going, and Sarah's going to field some of those questions, and we may be answering some of them even during the presentation. So we have no conflicts of interest to declare. And again, this is the review on the CE, so make sure to fill out the evaluation at the end if you'd like CE. So our learning objectives. At the end of this program, the pharmacists and technicians that are participating should be able to discuss basic principles of insurance policies, identify insurable risks associated with compounding pharmacies, and actually really regular pharmacies, and then apply practical risk management techniques to prevent or mitigate pharmacy liability exposures. And I will turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit more in the beginning here about the policy.
Yes, thanks, Kristen. So questions to ask when considering an insurance policy and how to choose one that best suits your needs. Some general concerns are to look at what is covered. Are you, your employees, and your entity covered? If you have a pharmacy, is your pharmacy entity protected? How much liability insurance do you need? And how is a claim handled? All pretty important things to look at. Next slide, Kristen. Furthermore, you have to also think pharmacy specific and ask yourself, you know, does your insurance carrier and the policy I'm considering understand pharmacy? Do they understand my operations and know what coverages I'll need so that I don't have any gaps or exposures as I practice as a pharmacist or at my pharmacy? Does my agent or my carrier understand compounding? Do they know the difference between non-sterile simple and sterile compounding? There are different risks involved and associated with you know, obviously those different kinds of compounding. Do they understand collaborative practice agreements? Do they know the difference between laboratory testing, immunizations? Does my agent know that this might be happening at my pharmacy, that I might be administering these immunizations, whether it be for flu shots or more recently the COVID vaccines? And then opiate dispensing, another pharmacy-specific concern that you want to make sure that your carrier understands so that that coverage is there for these. Those are just a few. Next slide. So I'll break down, there's really two different types of policy forms that you'll see. And these are really important to look at whenever your agent is presenting a policy for you. And the first one is an occurrence-based policy. And you want to find the one that best fits your needs for your business. but an occurrence policy will respond to claims that occur during the policy period. So say you have a policy that began a year ago and it expired yesterday. So you had it all last year and it just expired yesterday. However, you're notified of a claim that happened 3 months ago. Somebody had, maybe a reaction or some effects of a misfill or something. But it happened 3 months ago during the policy. In this occurrence policy, that claim would be covered. Even though the policy expired yesterday, it would be covered because the claim occurred during the policy term. Whether it's 3 months ago, whether it was a week before it expired, it's covered. The next slide, the other policy is a, Kristen, next slide. Yep, is a claims made policy. And this is different in the way that coverage for claims only responds because both the incident and the claim have to happen during the policy period. So if you have a policy that began a year ago and it expired today, but the claim comes in tomorrow, that claim would not be covered because the policy is expired and the claim was not reported during the policy term. So these, I always tell business owners and pharmacists, make sure that whenever you're getting a policy for yourself or for your business, just be aware of those because you want to make sure that, according to your situation, which one best suits your needs. Are you worried about a claim that could come in later, or do you think when the policy ends, your exposure will end as well? Next slide. Primary versus excess policies. So the next thing I want to discuss in regards to the policies is whether it's a primary or an excess policy. The primary layer is the policy that pays first in the event of a claim. So, for example, a commercial policy issued to businesses would be the primary policy. If you're a pharmacy owner, you need your commercial business owner's package. The excess layer is the second layer of protection. It's an additional or excess policy. Typically, they're optional. An umbrella policy would be a great example of this. And an umbrella policy is a policy that covers the underlying policies, and you only dip into the limits of an umbrella policy when your primary layer or your commercial policy limits are exhausted. But the umbrella policy can protect you from having to use your own personal assets, which is important. When you're a business owner, you have to think about that. Another example of an excess policy is a personal professional liability policy. So this is something that you would carry as a pharmacist. You have your individual professional liability that hopefully you carry all the time, 24/7, that you have for yourself. But that's an excess policy as well. Let's see. So slide 10, common coverages for business owners. And I want to dig more into what I was talking about before, the commercial insurance policy, to be specific. Commercial insurance is a common coverage and a common policy for business owners. So if you're a pharmacist and you hope to one day open your own pharmacy, or really any business for that matter, this will be important to you as a business owner. You'll want to know how to protect your business, how to equip yourself with the best possible policy. Your commercial insurance should include your general liability. And when you hear general liability, this typically includes business exposures such as slips and falls, theft, fire, that sort of thing. And then you have, kind of jumping down, your property exposure. This will be under your commercial insurance. Your property could include the building itself, if you own the building, or if you rent, it could be the property inside your business. So inside your pharmacy, all of your inventory, your drugs, your fixtures, your computers, hoods, that sort of thing. And then there's, let's see, your cyber liability. This is a growing threat because of the tech age that we're in. But whether it's through criminal activity of others, or if you have an employee that unintentionally, improperly disposes of some records, some credit card information, or they accidentally just expose some sensitive information, this coverage would come into play. So it's important to look at as a business owner in case there is an accidental breach or a criminal cyber attack. Sexual misconduct and physical abuse. Some of the greatest challenges facing business owners today are these allegations of physical abuse or sexual misconduct made against you or your employees. And you might think it's not an exposure for you as a business owner, but with different pharmacy settings, such as pharmacies that you're offering consulting in private rooms, or you're giving flu shots in private areas, or even an employee that might be delivering scripts to someone's home, all of those areas could be a risk for your business and for a possible sexual misconduct allegation. Let's see. Employment practices liability, that one is typically an endorsement, which Kristen will get into later. But this is still something to look for when you're looking at a policy as a business owner. This provides members with protection against wrongful employment practices, including failure to hire or promote, wrongful termination, discrimination, sexual harassment, all of those things that business owners might face. Loss of income, this covers a business in the event of a disaster, for example, a hurricane. Not only do you have physical damage, you could have that to your business, to your pharmacy, but your pharmacy could be shut down and closed and experience financial losses from that as well. So look for that in your policy, in your commercial insurance policy. And then, like I said before, your property, and that could be your building itself if you own it. It could be all the contents inside, your equipment, hoods, that sort of thing. Next slide.
I changed it.
Oh, is it changed?
Yeah.
It's not changed for me. Okay, sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay. So also as a pharmacy business owner, you have to think about workers' compensation. And so I guess let's go into workers' compensation. This insurance, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's utilized in the event that your employee suffers a work-related injury or an illness. Some examples would be if your employee trips at work and hurts their back, and they might need to go to the doctor for a visit, or maybe they might have to have surgery. Another example is if your employee is making a prescription delivery to someone's home and they happen to slip on ice and have to go to the emergency room. In Texas, we just had an ice apocalypse, and so that could definitely be a scenario that could happen where they're slipping and falling on ice, and then you have a workers' compensation claim on your hands. But touching on that last example where the employee is making a prescription delivery, that brings us to a business-owned auto, commercial autos. Whether your business, whether your pharmacy owns one vehicle or a fleet of vehicles, and they provide delivery services to customers, this is a policy to consider as well. And it's important to know that your personal auto insurance will not cover business use. So if you're a business owner and you have a small independent pharmacy and you think, oh, I'll just lend out my personal auto to my employee to go make this run of prescriptions, your personal auto insurance will not cover business use. Commercial umbrella, we talked about this a few slides back. This is that excess policy that goes over all of your underlying policies. This could include your commercial auto policy. It could include a workers' compensation policy. So when you have your commercial business package plus your workers' compensation policy plus your commercial auto policy, your umbrella will go over all of those. And if any of those underlying policies are ever exhausted, then you can dip into this policy. Life and disability, this is important insurance to have overall, whether you're a mother, a father, or a spouse. It's important to protect your loved ones and ensure they're financially comfortable in your absence. But moreover, life insurance plays an important role in business too. You can protect the future of your organization, protect your pharmacy in a variety of different ways with different policies and options out there. Next slide.
Okay, so Sarah went over some of the coverages that business owners should look at. And so let's break down the insurance policy all together so that you guys get a little bit more understanding of what each of those sections in your policy means, what some of the definitions mean and stuff. You know, oftentimes policies are maybe 30, 40, even 100 pages long. And so I know myself as a homeowner and an auto owner that I never really sat down and read my policy, but there are some pieces that you should at least know what's going on, especially within your business policy. So the insurance policy, it's a legal contract. And so it has definitions, there might be exclusions in there, endorsement, or the endorsements are an extra contract that goes on. There's in there is what's called the insuring agreement, which is the portion of the policy in which the insurer promises to make payment to or on behalf of the insured because of a loss. The policy is also going to tell you what to do in case of a loss. So if you have someone show up at your pharmacy that has experienced a medication error, your policy is going to tell you exactly, you know, who to call and what steps you're supposed to take. And then it's also going to talk about the limits within your policy, and we'll get into those a little bit later. So definitions and coverages. So this is going to show who and what is covered in your policy. It's going to define terms within the definitions, and you're going to see a lot of these definitions are either in quotation marks or bolded, and they're just common terms that are going to be seen throughout the policy. Oftentimes the policy will define exactly who an employee is. What they consider bodily injury within the policy, what damages are, what limits are. And then more specific to pharmacy, we get into situations in which even maybe pharmacy services is defined or compounding is defined. So like I said, it's going to say who and what is covered. And so here you can see in this bottom box on the right-hand side, here's a definition for employee from an insurance policy. And it goes through that it's going to anybody that's employed by you, which is including an independent contractor that's performing pharmacy services. And it's important, I think, when you're looking at your policies and you own a pharmacy, is it covering your pharmacists and your technicians? Does it include student pharmacists and student interns that come in and work underneath of you? And then also it's important, I think, too, that you double check and make sure is part-time or full-time employment covered. And then also, we've had a lot of questions lately about volunteers within a pharmacy. I think especially, you know, with COVID and running some of the clinics that have been run and the vaccine clinics, you know, we have some volunteers coming in. And so it's important also when you're looking at your coverage, are volunteers included within that? So here's another example of coverages that I think it's really important to point out, and this is just a copy of an insurance policy. But I think that when you're looking at it, it's important that you read the entire definition. And so if you go through this entire definition, at the very end, after the comma there, it says, but only in the operations of a retail pharmacist or pharmacy. And so I think if you think about what's going on in a retail pharmacy, typically we think about the fact that, you know, we're filling prescriptions, we're counseling patients, we're helping them choose over-the-counter items, but even occasionally in our retail pharmacy, we're required to compound. Maybe it just means, you know, grinding some tablets and putting them some Aura Plus and Aura Sweet to send a suspension out the door, maybe mixing creams. So, you know, what is considered the retail pharmacy in this definition? And so that brings me to this first case study. We see four to five compounding claims a year that had to do with clonidine and mixing it for children. And so clonidine is available as a 0.1 milligram, 0.2 milligram, and 0.3 milligram tablet. And it's also available as a raw ingredient. And so we see compounding, you know, with all of the options. Maybe the pharmacy is just grinding the tablets and adding it to a vehicle for a suspension, or sometimes they are weighing out the raw ingredients, and we see errors in both, whether it be in the calculations and the math, or even in the weighing. As most of you know, the clonidine in children is used to treat a variety of different things in the children, some ADHD, sometimes used for sleep and such. And usually it's in children that have other comorbidities, and often they're very young. So in this particular case, the dose was ordered for the child, and he received 100 times too much clonidine. And he took the first dose and was in the ICU for 2 days on a ventilator. So usually these claims don't have lasting effects on children, but there is always an error, and oftentimes it's very expensive medical bills, because if you think about the fact that the workup that's required after a child has spent several days in the ICU, the medical bills are usually pretty high, and the sympathy factor is high. But I think if you look back at this definition where it says retail pharmacy, you really have to wonder, when it comes down to a claim being filed, in this instance, if you made it in your regular retail pharmacy and not in a compounding pharmacy, would your policy really have coverage? And so just bringing out just some important things to think about and look at as you're reading your policy. So another portion that we're going to see on there is something called exclusions. And so this is a provision that eliminates coverage for some type of risk. And it narrows the scope of coverage provided by that insuring agreement. And insurers utilize exclusions to carve away coverage. So if you think about the fact that maybe your business owner policy is going to exclude any auto exposure, because then they want to turn around and add that in with an endorsement so that you can have more specific coverage. So exclusions can be looked at as good and bad. This exclusion here that is in the box on the slide is one that is added in this particular instance, in which the pharmacy or the insurance company doesn't want to provide any coverage for drugs that are withdrawn or removed from the market for safety reasons, which, as you can imagine, as an insurance company, is probably pretty normal, considering if the drug's been removed for safety reasons, then they don't want to be involved in that as well. Here's another example of an insurance policy that we've seen, and it's important again that we're reading the definitions and then we're reading the exclusions, because if here you see that the exclusion is any injury arising out of insurance consulting, diagnostic, referral, or some of those services, including blood tests, prescriber or administering of any drugs or vaccinations, and managing drug therapy, even as applicable under the statutes. So if you are doing any type of advanced practice within your pharmacy, or you're providing immunizations, maybe you have a collaborative practice agreement with with a physician or provider, then this particular policy excludes all of those activities. And so if you were to have a claim that came out of maybe your interpreting of a blood result and dispensing of an anticoagulant, then there would not be any coverage under this policy for those activities. So I talked about exclusion, so the things that the policy excludes, but then let's talk now about endorsements. And I kind of like to think about this as your a la carte menu. When you're at a restaurant, this is where you kind of add things back into what you want. So it's a legally binding document that's added to the insurance policy, and it can be added to help to meet the unique needs of the business. And so if you think about pharmacy, some of the endorsements you might see are compounding pharmacy or advanced practice, and not all pharmacies are doing compounding, and it's a risk exposure that's out there, and it's obviously costs more to insure compounding pharmacies. And so this is really an ability to make insurance affordable for the people that aren't doing extra activities. So your regular retail pharmacy that's not engaged in any type of compounding may be paying a different amount because the compounding is more risky. And so for the insurance company to add on that compounding, then there's an additional charge. Same thing as you start looking at advanced practice. And then also another endorsement that I think we see a lot of in pharmacy now is increases in spoilage limits because of those specialty medications and the exposure due to the cost of those medications. So the endorsement just allows the business owner to have more complete coverage. So here's an example of an endorsement that it's a little tricky to read, and so another reason that we wanted to go over it, an endorsement can be something added on, and it actually can also be something that's excluded too. It's an additional contract. So this particular endorsement has to do with opioid dispensing. And so essentially what this one says is that there's no coverage for any claim that's brought about against an insured by a municipality or a state or an organization. But there is some coverage if the claim is brought about by the patient or the patient's estate for a claim arising out of opioid use. However, you can see here that each claim is subject to a $25,000 deductible. So as we're looking at the opioid crisis and some of the lawsuits that have been going on around the country and opioid dispensing and the crackdown and stuff, we can see here that this is an important part of the policy for the insured to understand that if they do get a claim of wrongful death brought to them or filed against them by a patient's estate, then they're going to be subject to a $25,000 deductible before their insurance takes effect too, or as in addition to their insurance.
Kristen, we have a question on that, I think. Is there any provision or coverage to protect compounding pharmacies from insurance recoupment?
Insurance recoupment, and I guess I don't understand exactly.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Protect compounding pharmacies. Or maybe we can come back to that one.
I know what you're talking about. You're talking about from the third parties in terms of the billing. No, because the
following
way
an audit. Possibly.
Yes, following an audit. I understand that. Yep. And so that would be more of a business practices side. The type of insurance that we're talking about now provides for protection. Your professional liability policy provides for protection due to bodily injury. That's what we're kind of going over in terms of this type of policy right now. So no in that answer in terms of professional liability, the way that we're speaking about it right now. Okay, Sarah, I think you have the next slide.
Okay, yeah, I'll talk about limits. So whenever you look at a policy when your agent proposes one to you, and we'll show you a deck page here in just a minute, but limits on liability policies are given as per occurrence and per aggregate. The per occurrence limit is the most the policy will pay for any one incident or loss. Today's industry standard is 1 million occurrence. The aggregate limit is the most the policy will pay during any one policy year, and today's industry standard is 3 million aggregate. So that's what you'll see on your declarations page and your certificate. But an example would be the policy will pay up to 3 1 million claims or 6 500,000 claims in any year. Now that's very unlikely, and you probably hopefully won't see that. But that's just to kind of break it down for you. And I think the next slide will be your declarations page. So if you get your policy, it's usually a really big, thick binder, and nobody ever reads it, and it's understandable. But like Kristen was saying, the few things, if you do go through your policy as you should, look for those endorsements, exclusions, and look at this deck page. It's usually one of the first pages on your policy. And you'll want to look at this and check things like the policy period, and that's at the top right-hand corner. Make sure the dates are correct. Know when your expiration date is so you don't miss it, so you don't have a gap in your next policy starting. Check your limits, like we just talked about. Your limits should be 1 million, 3 million, or whatever you might need. It could be a 2 million, 4 million, 2 million occurrence, 4 million aggregate. Make sure you check your deductibles. So right here it says liability coverage, liability deductible 0. So on this policy there is no deductible for your liability, but on others you could see, you don't want to find out whenever you have a claim that you have a deductible of $10,000 when your loss is maybe $11,000. So make sure you're comfortable with that deductible figure. That is premium bearing as well. It will affect your premium as you manipulate your deductible. Check your exclusions. Like Kristen was saying, For example, this one says excluding sterile compounding. That's pretty major if your operations in your pharmacy is doing exactly that. Kristen, next slide.
Okay.
Oh, I think we have a question.
Okay.
If I close a pharmacy, do I need to keep the general and professional liability insurance for some time after closing? That's a really great question, and it kind of goes back to the first few slides we were talking about the occurrence policy and the claims made policy. So if you close your pharmacy and you end your policy and you have an occurrence policy, you hopefully do not have any exposures after your pharmacy is closed. So say I closed my pharmacy yesterday and my policy ended yesterday and I'm on an occurrence policy and a claim comes in tomorrow for a claim that happened 3 months ago. If you're on an occurrence policy, that policy will pay for that claim. Now, if you're on a claims made policy, you need to consider, and we didn't really go into this, but you would need to consider tail coverage. And it's very costly because typically you're switching carriers and providers and they're taking on the exposure that you had while you were in operation. But that tail coverage will cover you for a certain reporting period. So if you close your pharmacy and you have no more operations and you're on a occurrence policy, my suggestion would be you would be safe, you would be in the clear. But if you're on a claims made policy and you close your pharmacy, I would be fearful that a claim could come in a month after I closed my pharmacy and it was a claims made policy. So that's just something you need to talk to your agent about that. So that was a good question. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss anybody else. I think you can go on, Kristen.
Okay. So another piece of your policy that's going to be important is what to do in case of a loss or a claim. And so oftentimes it's going to tell you, to provide notice as soon as possible. Oftentimes the insurance company likes to know if something major is happening or might be coming down the tracks. Oftentimes I think people are hesitant to report things to their insurance company because oftentimes I think that raises their rate or could potentially raise their rate upon renewal. But I think that in terms of a professional liability claim, it's good if you know about a medication error that's occurred, in which there was patient harm. It's okay to go ahead and let the insurance company know because oftentimes they can start working on it right away. Also, it's very important that you cooperate. And so when your claims adjuster reaches out to you after, maybe a lawsuit's been filed and the claims adjuster reaches out to you and wants more information about the claim, go ahead and cooperate with them because they're really your partner in this and they're here to mitigate the losses. So if they ask for copies or they ask for contracts or whatever, work with them to provide and provide that information to them. Sometimes they're going to ask for legal documents and other claim information, and that's really going to be part of their investigation and help them determine the circumstances of the loss, do further investigation, and then oftentimes that allows them either to work on settlement agreements or to understand as they hire legal counsel, what they need to look for in that legal counsel, and then also what the overall outlook of the claim is going to be.
So speaking on claims, Kristen, we've got one question about
a
claim. Does loss of income, which would be considered a claim, you would file that as a claim. Does loss of income include revenue loss related to a pandemic? And so we had a lot of these that did come in last year when things were shut down. And so I hate to answer claims related questions and scenarios since that isn't exactly my department, but I believe there were claims filed on that. Kristen, do you have any claims information on that?
Right. So again, like Sarah said, it's a typical claims answer. It depends. So in terms of pandemic, it would just depend on what your policy said. So there's several probably 100 insurance policies out there, and each one reads a little bit differently, and so it's important to read exactly what yours says. for that. So when we start talking again about insurance policies and pharmacy specific issues, we think it's important, that you're looking in your policy that you do have coverage for compounding, immunizations, opioids, and that's really come to the forefront probably in about the last 10 years. How about HIPAA violations and things that might be occurring because of that, collaborative practice agreements, and then license defense. And this is an addition to some insurance policies in which the insurance policy will provide you with some coverage and maybe some legal assistance if you are brought before the Board of Pharmacy for certain reasons. So it's an addition to an insurance policy, and then just an important part that if you read through and find it that it's in your policy, that is really what it's about. So let's look at another case study. This is a pharmacy fire. And actually right here you can see the pharmacy or the fire started next door in a laundromat actually. And the pharmacy suffered a total loss. And the last time I even looked at this claim, the costs associated with it were greater than $2 million. And the pharmacy had not yet reopened. And so things can happen and disasters occur, and that's definitely what insurance is for. But I think we have some risk management strategies, and then also a disaster recovery strategy to look at preventing some of the preventing losses, but then also helping in terms of the disaster to get back up on your feet. So from a claim standpoint, when that pharmacy fire occurred, there's going to be things that we go into right away in terms of investigating. So the location, where the fire was located, did they own that building or were they renting it? And if they rented it, then what happens in the lease agreement? Who's in charge of repairs and that type of information? And so like when I said, when you start dealing with a claim, it's important that when the adjuster starts asking for documents and this type of information that you provide it. Inventory, how much inventory do you have? Do you keep a perpetual inventory within your pharmacy? Do you have electronic access to that? How are you going to know exactly how much inventory was in that pharmacy in terms of a total loss so that we can reimburse you for that? And then also building contents, so computer hardware, fixtures. Did you have a large front end with a lot of OTC products? Did you have gifts and cards, that types of thing? And then also we're going to look at loss of income and financial records for that. And that's all just part of the initial investigation on the claim. So in terms of risk management, when we look at a fire, there's some things, that we definitely put in place or would like to see in place. So does the building have an alarm? Is there after hours notification for that alarm? So if the pharmacy starts on fire, at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, when the alarm goes off, who does it notify? And then how do they respond to that notification? How about if you have a fire while you're working during the day and you have employees in the building? Do you have a way to account for all employees that are working within the building? And I think, when we're in a retail pharmacy, there might only be 3 or 4 of us. But if you think about large compounding operations or pharmacies with 50 or 60 employees in there, and there's a fire, how are you going to account for who should have gotten out of the building? Do you have an evacuation plan? So again, even if you only have a couple of employees or maybe you have a large building, what's the fire evacuation plan, and do all of your employees know it? Secure medication. So how about if you do have a fire and it happens in the middle of the night and the pharmacy manager goes down, there's still a lot of drugs that are exposed right then at that time. And so how are you going to maintain security of those medications in the event that the fire occurs, until you can get the site secured? Do you have fire extinguishers within your pharmacy? And then a disaster recovery plan. So when we look at a disaster recovery plan, the main goal of that is to get the pharmacy up and running as fast as possible. And I think when you talk to a claims adjuster, they feel the same way as well. So the disaster recovery plan that you put in place is definitely going to be unique to your operation. So it's going to be unique to your business, to the type of patients you serve, and to the type of employees that you have. So obviously, if you're a small retail pharmacy, it's going to be a little bit different than if you're providing specialty medications to a group of people around the country, your disaster recovery plan is going to look much different. So let's look at it in terms of your business. If you think about, we'll just talk about fire since that's our case study. So if your business catches on fire and it's a complete loss, what can you do to get moved to a new location? Can you secure a temporary location? Are there empty buildings within your city, maybe within your local neighborhood that you could potentially rent? Maybe you just need a small travel trailer because you have a small business. Maybe an enclosed trailer would be sufficient depending on how long you're going to be down. Do you need additional storage? Do you also carry HME equipment and have a lot of large items that need a place for storage that you'll have to secure a second location for storage? When you start thinking about loss of income, do you have access to your financial records? So when you file a loss of income claim because of a fire, do you have an electronic copy of your tax returns and your profit and loss statement so that we can get working on getting that reimbursement started for you right away? And then data. So do you have electronic access to your inventory information? So again, are you keeping a perpetual inventory? Do you have access to that inventory information outside of your pharmacy? Do you have information for your wholesalers, your login to get back into your wholesaler account so that you can maybe even start getting your inventory information from there? How about PBM contracts? Do you have access electronically to that data out in the cloud so that you can get those contracts back up and running? And the same thing with license information. Do you have license? Are you licensed in all 50 states? Do you have access to that outside of your pharmacy, again, in the cloud where you can get that information and get rolling again? And this is by no means an all-inclusive list, but just a few things I think that you should think about. So then how about disaster recovery for your patients? So think about the pharmacy there that hadn't reopened. If they were the only pharmacy in the neighborhood, that were servicing them, how are their patients now getting their medications? Are they having to travel long distances to get medication? Were they able to get those patients moved to a different pharmacy? And so it's important as you think about getting your business back up and running, it's important that you retain those patients. And so that's going to be a matter of time and process. So if your patients, if you just kind of left them hanging and weren't able to help them out, are they going to be loyal to you? Or are they going to say, oh, the guy down the street, he just helped me out and I'll just move all my stuff there? So when you're thinking about your patients and their interruption of care, think about, do you have electronic access to your patient profiles? How easy can you get that information and either, like I said, get up and running again in the second location, or maybe even get that information to another pharmacy? Maybe you have multiple stores, and so you can send those patients, to another store for a short time until you can get the other location back up and running. Or maybe even have an agreement with another pharmacy to take care of your patients in transition. It's a, kind of a gentleman's agreement that you'll take care of my patients and then you'll give them back when I'm, back up and running, and I would do the same for you. And so think about your patients and how you're going to take care of them and how you're really going to be able to maintain your business once you're back open, if you have to get new patients or if your patients come back to you. And then also another part to think about is the disaster recovery plan is your employees. So if you have a total loss and you're not dispensing any medications, can you really afford to keep all of your employees on staff depending on how long it is until you open? And then also, do you have contract requirements? Did you hire a pharmacist and under a contract and guarantee them full-time employment for a certain amount of time? And if so, then what are you going to do about that contract? How are you going to keep them working? Which of your employees are essential to reopening? I mean, obviously, some of them are going to be essential. And then can they help you move to another location? Can your employees be actively involved in the reordering of medications and restocking the pharmacy and getting up and going again? And how can you utilize them in a different role than maybe filling prescriptions, but, restocking the pharmacy? And then also, unfortunately, you might have to lay off employees. And so depending on the length of time until reopening, if it's only going to be a couple of weeks, you may be able to continue to pay your pharmacy technicians. But if we're looking at a year, that probably isn't reasonable for you. And then also, if you're going to build a new pharmacy and put in new operations, what does that new design look like? And maybe is it the same number of pharmacists, technicians, and clerks, or does that change the number of people that you actually need? And so I think, you know, as you're looking at your disaster recovery plan, it's like I said, everybody's is going to be a little bit different, especially based on the business that you do. But here's some tips or some, you know, places really to look and think about how you would function in terms of a disaster in your pharmacy, and what your business would look like afterwards, and then how you could potentially get it back up and running. Okay, Sarah?
Okay, thanks. And yeah, that was good. I hope this information that we provided has been really helpful. We do have a few questions that we can answer right now, but also our emails are here on the screen if you ever want to reach out to either one of us. One of the questions is, let's see, if you are an employee of a pharmacy that provides sterile compounding and you, as the pharmacist, also provides patient clinical monitoring, would the sterile compounding endorsement be adequate, or would you need additional coverage? Kristen, do you want to answer that one?
So again, it would depend on what your policy said. So, you know, it's important, and this is one thing that we talk about with the personal professional liability policy, so that excess policy. As a pharmacist, you have control over the fact that you purchase that and you own that for yourself, and you're not reliant on the business or your employer. So if you're doing sterile compounding, then obviously your employer should have sterile compounding coverage, and then you would be covered while you were at work. If you purchase that additional professional liability policy that has sterile compounding on it, then you would have that second layer of coverage as well.
Yeah, and just more on that, I just always recommend any pharmacist I talk to, you really should carry your individual professional liability 24/7 for yourself. I know we talked a lot about the commercial business owners package, and there's a lot of components to that. But if you're a pharmacist, covering yourself individually and first is really important. It'll cover you 24/7. Wherever you go. So if you're sitting at a baseball game and, you know, a neighbor or friend asks, hey, my son has a rash, can I combine these two creams? And you say, even if you say, hey, I don't think you should do that, don't do that, they're asking you as a pharmacist, should you do that? And you, even if you don't give them a recommendation and they go home and do it, they could still name you in a claim, in a suit. And so if you have that 24/7, that's covering you. And then also, even if you are employed at a pharmacy, I mean, you don't know if that business owner maybe accidentally let their policy lapse, or, I mean, how do you know that you are covered under them always? And then also claims typically will name the entity, that business that you're employed at, and they'll also name the individual as well. So that's just something to think about. And it's, you know, just always carry your individual professional liability. Let's see, we have another question. If you have, I think this is litigation with the Board of Pharmacy, would there be coverage for your lawyer, or would it be an attorney from the insurance company? That's a great question. Kristen, do you want to answer that one?
It's my favorite answer. It depends. It just depends on the policy that you have. So, and what your insurance policy allows for, and how it's handled. Our particular company, typically, they hire lawyers within the city or the state in which the accusation or the litigation is going on. So, and they're usually background checked and such. So not usually from the insurance company, though, no.
Okay, and then we have another question back on the occurrence policy. Do the occurrence policies have an end date? So typically the occurrence policy is the normal policy term, which is a year. So typically you'll see an occurrence policy is for 1 year. Hopefully that answers that one.
And it'll show on the deck page.
Oh, yep, exactly, Kristen. It'll show on your deck page how long is your policy for. Another question, let's see, where did it go? Do pharmacy techs need an insurance policy?
That's a great question. I think as the role of the technicians advances and they start doing more and more activities, and with the PrEP Act now is allowing technicians to provide immunizations and the COVID-19 vaccine and testing, and so they definitely are opening themselves up to more exposure. And so I think it's important, yes, that they purchase a policy as well, so that and again, it's that excess layer of coverage that will protect them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for any pharmacy related activities that they're doing.
Okay, let's see this one. A developing trend in patient care is inclusion of intravenous suites and hydration therapy suites in pharmacies. Any pharmacy mutual policy cover these?
It would be dependent on. It would just be dependent on the business operation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really would. That's we are seeing that, and we are seeing pharmacies, kind of find their niches and what works out there for their environment and the needs in their community. I will say, Pharmacists Mutual, our policy itself, and our we're really good about kind of diving in and learning about your operations and your business and how to best find a policy that fits those needs. So I know that doesn't really answer that question, but I guess it kind of depends on just diving in more to what that business entails. Can you discuss settlements and how, if a policyholder has any say in whether a matter is settled or not?
Yeah, I think definitely our claims adjuster, at least our particular claims adjusters, they're very versed in pharmacy, and so they do a lot of investigative work. They work with attorneys, healthcare attorneys that are used to pharmacy errors, and there's a lot of research into where the venue, where was the lawsuit filed, what does the judicial makeup look like, is it a conservative venue or is it a more liberal venue? And I mean that in terms of, do they give out a lot of settlement, or are there high verdicts, or do they tend to be more conservative in terms of their verdicts? So there's a lot of information that's taken into account when we're looking at litigation and when settlements occur, and then when we decide to take things to trial. And so I think, just depending on the situation, yes, I think there's a lot of times that the insured is able to be a part of that, and then other times, where the insurance company will just say, we're going to take this in our own hands and deal with it. So there's a lot that goes into the settlement decisions, though.
So another question, I must have misunderstood the occurrence policy question, asks, if my policy ended today and something occurred 5 years ago, oh gosh, moving, while the policy was active, would I still be covered? So if it's an occurrence policy and the claim happened 5 years ago during that policy while it was active, but it's not reported until 5 years later, yes, I believe that claim would be covered because it occurred during the policy and while it was active, even though it's reported after the policy ended, because it's an occurrence policy and it happened when the policy was active, it would be covered. And it would not be the same if it was a claims made. If it's a claims made and the claim is made after the policy is over, then the claim is not covered. I hope I understood your question that time.
That, and the other thing too, the other thing too about that claim from 5 years ago, because if it occurred during the policy period, then there would be coverage. But when we start looking back that far, we start getting into issues of statute of limitations and that sort of thing for filing a lawsuit.
It's true, yeah. Okay, let's see. How does flavoring antibiotic suspensions for kids fit into compounding? The state board inspector had mentioned that adding flavoring is considered flavoring, but do you guys view that, or do you think flavoring is viewing as compounding?
So we defer to what is allowed either by USP 797 or the state. So if your particular state views it as compounding, then we would defer it, to compounding. If your state does not view it as compounding and just flavoring, then that's the way that we would look at it as well.
Mm-hmm. Another question. Do you hire pharmacists to work at PMIC, Pharmacists Mutual? Yes, Kristen Jones is a pharmacist, and she works for Pharmacists Mutual. And Kristen, I think we have a lawyer pharmacist as well.
Yes.
Someone
so
who
some
went
of
to
you
school
may
for
be,
that long.
Yeah. Some of you may be familiar with Don McGuire. He's our Senior Vice President of Legal, and he's also a pharmacist.
A lawyer and a pharmacist. And then Kristen, yes, you're a pharmacist. So that answer
Yes.
is yes. Okay, another question. Compounding pharmacies are subject to audit by third-party payers. What insurance options or provisions are available to cover audits from contracted third-party payers? Is there any coverage or reimbursement to mitigate losses from insurance audits?
That's a great question, and I know it's a huge issue in the compounding industry right now. Not from our perspective, there's not. I don't know if there would be a policy out there through another carrier, but not that we are aware of.
Mm-hmm. Do we know this number? A question is, what % of claims go to court? Kristen, do you happen to know that percentage?
I don't know that percentage. I would have to get with our claims people and see if they knew it.
Yeah, I know.
It's very small.
Yeah, we
very small.
That. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very small.
Okay.
If you think about, I was just gonna expand on that a little bit. If you think about, if your insurance company is a mutual company or what, the goal overall is to reduce the cost. And so when we start looking into claims and what a trial costs, oftentimes those costs are really prohibitive in terms of going to trial if we can actually settle the claim itself outside of court. If you think about expert witnesses, depositions, lawyers, court costs, those types of things, it can get very, very expensive. So most of the time, the ultimate goal is to try to settle if that's in the best interest of the insured and the insurance company.
And we get this question a lot. No, it's just another question. We get this one. How much does a general insurance policy cost? Ballpark figure. So that's kind of tricky. The general insurance policy, is that just your general liability, or is this your business owner's package that includes your general liability, your professional liability, your property? It's really hard too, because you could have a small, independent community pharmacy, or you could have a sterile compounding multi-location facility. So I've seen the premiums all across the board, and it's just tough. And one of the other questions was, how are premium rates determined, realizing considerations for the practice setting and coverage lines included? So that kind of goes along with the ballpark, trying to determine a ballpark premium figure. They look at anything from, your script count, what is your exposure and patients. They look at, we take into consideration your inventory, your drugs, like you have a lot of foliage, Kristen, anything, I don't know. It's just it's such a hard.
I think when you look at insurance, there's a lot of actuarial data, and they're the ones that come up with that. And I think that's why you see, questions about, what your inventory is. Are you sterile compounding? Are you non-sterile compounding? And what percentages? There's a lot of, risk that's assessed by, and the premiums are figured based, on numerical data that we have based on the risk associated with it. Also, different areas of the country, you might pay more insurance for different areas of the country that you live. So, it's all, it's an equation all the time. I will say, if you're asking about the personal professional liability policy, so the individual policy, that from Pharmacists Mutual is $139, and then it goes up if you do sterile compounding, or if you do sterile compounding of epidurals and intrathecals. It's a little bit more.
Someone asked, is it better to have different coverage if you own the building that you have your pharmacy in? I would say I think it's best to have your insurance with one agent in one place, so that they understand the entire scope of your operations, and then also that just helps lessen the the risk of there being a gap. So if you're placing your insurance policies with different agents and different carriers, there's a chance of a gap or somebody missing something. So I would say if you own the building and your pharmacy and business is in that building, just insure it all in one place. I think that's the best way to go about it. If you retire and close your pharmacy, can you still have auto insurance as a private citizen through your company? Yes. I believe that's true throughout all. I mean, we're on all 50 states. Yes, I think that's correct. You can. We Pharmacists Mutual, we do pharmacies, vets, dental, home health care, and we do life, disability. We also do personal auto, personal home. We just want to be your one source for all of those needs. Is there an advantage to have pharmacies have their separate policies if they have the same owner, or better to have them all under one policy? Again, I would say that just I think having
Typically, they're going to have to be under one policy.
They're going to have to be under one policy. Yeah. You don't
Usually.
Again, you don't want to risk the gaps and things like that. Let's see. Oh, someone mentioned we do also insure at Pharmacists Mutual text, and we employ pharmacy technicians as well. So that's something worth mentioning. How are premium rates determined? Realizing considerations for the practice. Oh, I think we answered that one. Premium rates, it's just a lot of things that are taken into consideration, like Kristen was saying. So, okay, I guess we're kind of going over our time there. If there's any more questions, Kristen's email's right there. Mine is there as well. Please reach out to us. We're more than happy to talk more on this with you or answer any questions that you have. It's been a pleasure. Thank you all for attending.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kristen and Sarah, for this fantastic webinar. As a reminder, for attendees that would like to receive your CE credit, please fill out the evaluation link found on the last page of the slide handouts. This link will also be emailed to all attendees following today's session, along with a recording to watch on demand. Thank you and have a great day.